I am Lauren Mitchell. I was 37 when I drove to my grandfather's house without warning on a chilly Monday afternoon in November, expecting to drop off soup and leave before dinner. Arthur Bennett opened the door so fast my knuckles were still raised. His face had gone bloodless. He caught my wrist, yanked me inside, and said in a whisper that cut straight through me, "Come in now, get hidden." I tried to ask what he meant. Then I heard a car roll over the stones in the driveway, and I saw my mother's sedan through the front window. Grandpa shoved me toward the kitchen and pointed at the tight space behind the tall cupboard beside the pantry. He did not seem lost. He seemed prepared. During the next 45 minutes, I listened to my mother reveal what she had come to do, and afterward, nothing in our family could be put back the way it had been. Welcome back to Dull Pain Stories, where quiet people finally stop swallowing the truth. This is the story of the day I learned my grandfather had been pretending to be weaker than he was, and the day my mother found out that pretending can work both ways. The space behind that cupboard smelled of dust, stale tea, and the old pine boards my grandfather had sanded himself decades earlier. I tucked my knees close and pressed one hand over my mouth. My pulse was hammering so loudly I thought the people in the living room would hear it before they saw me. The front door opened. No knock, no waiting. My mother's voice floated in first, soft and bright, the way she sounded in public when she wanted everyone to think she was kind. "Dad, it's only us. Don't bother getting up." Two people came in behind her. I knew one of the walks at once, slow, heavy, a little too confident. That was Mark Collins, the man she had married about 18 months earlier. The third person moved quickly in narrow heels, clicking across the hardwood. A woman, I did not know her. Someone lowered themselves onto the couch. My grandfather asked, thin and wandering, whether they wanted coffee. No one answered as if he had spoken. The woman with the heels placed something on the coffee table. I knew the sound before I saw anything. A thick packet of papers dropped with the soft slap of expensive stationery. "We can make this very easy, Arthur," she said. "Just a few forms." My mother murmured soothingly, the same tone she used when I was a child and frightened of thunder. Once that voice had meant I could relax. Hearing it from behind a cupboard while she cornered her father made my stomach turn cold. I stayed still and watched a sliver of the kitchen through the gap. I understood immediately that this was not a friendly stop. It had been arranged. They had come with rolls, documents, and a schedule. My grandfather had known, and that was why he had shoved me out of sight. I did not yet understand how much he had already figured out. You need to know who was in that room to understand why I almost missed the truth. My mother, Diane Harper, was 61. My whole childhood, she controlled the emotional weather of every room she entered. If she smiled, everyone loosened up. If her voice cooled, the rest of us started correcting ourselves, apologizing, explaining, shrinking. Peace in our family was never free. Someone always paid for it, and most often I paid by giving in before she had to ask twice. I work as a geriatric nurse. I spend my shifts watching older people closely, how they answer questions, how they track time, whether confusion comes and goes, whether relatives speak over them. I know what cognitive decline can look like. I also know what it looks like when a capable elder is treated as if they have already disappeared. Mark Collins was 63, all polished shoes and vague business talk. He liked to mention investments, contracts, and big opportunities without ever naming anything solid. I had seen him maybe 7 times since the wedding. I had never trusted him, but not trusting someone is not the same as having proof. The woman in heels was a stranger. What frightened me was not only the paperwork. It was everything that had happened before that afternoon. For years, my grandfather called me every Sunday evening. 3.5 weeks earlier, those calls stopped. Around the same time, a bank notice meant for him somehow landed at my mother's house. I had even phoned the bank, uncomfortable and embarrassed, to ask why mail had been redirected. They told me they could not discuss Arthur Bennett's accounts with someone who was not authorized. I hung up and scolded myself for being suspicious. Families changed mailing addresses. Daughters helped aging fathers with paperwork. I wanted very badly to be wrong. Crouched behind that cupboard, Listening to an unfamiliar woman instruct my grandfather to sign legal documents, I knew I had not been wrong. I had simply looked away too soon. The stranger explained the forms in a smooth, flat voice. She said they would allow my mother to help so Arthur would not have to worry. Financial authority, she called it. Once the papers were signed, Diane could handle accounts, payments, correspondence, property matters, all of it. Then Mark spoke in a gentler tone, which somehow sounded more predatory. He said the house was too much for an elderly man by himself. He said there was a lovely senior residence in the next county, with clean grounds and a music room, and if the house was sold, the proceeds would cover excellent care. My grandfather made a small, wounded sound. "What about my roses?" he asked. No one answered. My mother leaned closer. I could hear fabric shift. Her voice dropped into the register she saved for things she had decided were facts. "Dad, we've talked about this. You're forgetting more and more. This is to protect you." Then she said the sentence that lodged inside me like a nail. "By New Year's, he won't even remember why he objected." She said it without a snarl. That was what made it worse. She sounded certain, practical, almost bored, as if she were discussing the weather. I bit the inside of my finger to keep from making a sound. Through the thin opening, I could see the side of my grandfather's chair and one of his hands on the arm. That hand moved, not in the trembling way of a confused man. Carefully, deliberately. He had a little pencil stub tucked against his palm, and on a torn corner of paper, hidden against the side of the chair, he was writing. My grandfather, the man they had just described as too far gone to manage his own life, was taking notes while they tried to take it from him. Grief and fury rose together. I thought I had come to save him. In that moment, I began to suspect he had already set a trap. For the next several minutes, Arthur Bennett gave the greatest performance I have ever witnessed. He called Mark the fellow from insurance twice. He asked again about the roses until my mother's patience began to tear. He apologized for losing track of things, then knocked the pen off the edge of the coffee table while the woman tried to place it in his fingers. "Dad, please," Diane snapped. There she was. The real Diane, slipping out from under the public voice. Mark let out a slow breath, the kind of sigh a man makes when the money is delayed. The woman gathered the papers and said perhaps Mr. Bennett was too fatigued today. My mother agreed in a tight voice. They would return for the birthday gathering, she said. He would be having a better day then. They left the documents behind for review, as if that made any of this less planned. As they collected coats and bags, my grandfather turned his head toward the kitchen, toward the cupboard, toward me. For one brief second, there was no fog in his eyes at all. They were clear, sharp, and entirely aware. He found me in the darkness like he had known exactly where I was. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Stay still. Wait." Then the vacant look slid back over his face, and he asked the room whether supper had already been served. My hands shook against my knees. My grandfather was not confused. He was pretending so well that his own daughter believed she was fooling him. The only question left was how long he had been acting. Grandpa had always been precise about ordinary things. He labeled jars in the garage, kept tax receipts by year, and could remember what a bag of flour cost in 1989 if the price mattered to a story. That was why the performance unnerved me so badly. He knew exactly which mistakes would look believable to people who wanted to believe them. He did not overplay it. He did not babble. He simply offered them enough fog to make them comfortable. Watching that from my hiding place made the room feel colder than the November air outside. They left the packet on the table. My mother kissed the top of his head and told him to rest. The front door closed. The engine started. Gravel crackled as the car reversed and left. I counted slowly to 70 before I moved. Then Grandpa spoke in his normal voice, low and steady. "You can come out, Lauren." I crawled from behind the cupboard on legs that barely worked. He stood at the window, watching the empty drive. When he turned around, he looked older than I had ever seen him and somehow 10 years younger at the same time. "What is happening?" I asked. He pulled me into a hug that smelled of cedar, pencil graphite, and winter air. Then he explained in the plain, unadorned way he had always explained everything. An old town bookkeeper stays a bookkeeper, he said. He had suspected for months that Diane and Mark wanted the house. At first, he noticed small things: mail arriving late, account questions he had not asked, my mother appearing at times she never used to visit. Rather than confront them, he decided to make them feel safe. He became forgetful in front of them. Slower. Easier to dismiss. He wanted them to reveal the full plan instead of stealing little pieces while everyone called it help. "If I told you your mother was doing this," he said, "you would have tried to explain it away." He was right, and it hurt. You needed to hear it without anyone translating it for you. That was why he had pulled me inside and hidden me. Not because he panicked. Because he needed one witness who knew what elder competency looked like and who still loved him enough to fight. Then he reached into the pocket of his cardigan and handed me the paper he had been writing on during the meeting. In his neat, compact script, there was a name and an amount. Helen Brooks, $21,700. "Start there," he said. "And Lauren, your mother has a key. She can walk in whenever she likes." He told me he had started keeping copies of everything in an old recipe box in the pantry. Envelopes, bank notices, notes about visits, times my mother arrived and left. He had not shown me because he needed to know whether Diane would stop if she thought he was vulnerable, or whether she would push harder. She pushed harder. That answer hurt him, I could see it, but he accepted it like a final number written at the bottom of a ledger. We sat at his kitchen table while the afternoon drained out of the windows. He told me the name belonged to an elder law attorney who had handled his and my grandmother's paperwork years earlier, back when Grandma was alive. The number was not a phone number. It was the amount missing from his accounts over 4 months. He had noticed the balance falling in small cuts: $600, $1,200, $300, then more. Not enough at once to trigger panic, but enough to hollow the account steadily. When he questioned the bank, he learned a new contact had been added to assist with his affairs. Help in our family had begun to look a lot like a drain. He stopped calling me on Sundays because Diane had started visiting on Sundays. He did not want her to know how often he still spoke to me. All the odd details I had dismissed snapped into alignment. The redirected mail, the missing calls. The way my mother said, "We're handling it," whenever his name came up. This was not confusion, it was a schedule. The house he built with his own hands, the savings he guarded for almost 45 years, the small fund in my grandmother's memory, all of it had become an object to be transferred. Even worse, his dignity had become something they felt entitled to vote away. "I'm not afraid of dying," he said. "I'm afraid of being erased while I'm sitting right here." I looked into the living room at the packet still waiting on the coffee table, the pen lying beside it like an insult. I heard my mother's voice again. "By New Year's, he won't even remember." "They are not taking this house," I said. Grandpa's mouth almost turned into a smile. "Then we should move fast." The drive back to my place took 19 minutes. My hands locked around the steering wheel. I spent the whole trip fighting the old instinct that had ruled my life with my mother. Soften it, smooth it, stay quiet, let the storm pass. I had survived Diane Harper by folding before she had to press too hard. It had felt cheaper than open war, but war had arrived without my permission. At work, I had seen the same pattern from the outside. Older patients whose relatives spoke for them. Bank questions that became family arguments. Sudden documents. Sudden moves. Sudden claims that a person who had been sharp last month was now too confused to decide anything. The desire to keep peace is exactly what situations like that feed on. That night, I did not sleep. I researched, because that is what nurses do when panic needs somewhere useful to go. What I read made me feel sick. Elder financial abuse is often carried out by the people closest to the victim. The trusted child. The helpful spouse. The relative who already has access and a story ready. Assigned financial authority can be brutally difficult to unwind because once the signature exists, the abuse hides behind permission. If Diane got Arthur's name on those papers, we would no longer be stopping a theft. We would be trying to reverse one that looked legal. At 2 in the morning, I sat under the yellow kitchen light with a legal pad and wrote everything down. Dates, Amounts. The redirected bank letter, the stranger with the documents, my mother's words, the packet on the table. My own habit of overresponsibility had always been a flaw, or so I thought. For once, it was aimed at the right target. By sunrise, I had a list. The first item was the attorney. I called Helen Brooks as soon as her office opened. When I said my grandfather's name, she recognized it instantly. Arthur Bennett, she said, warm and quick. Best numbers man in Maple Grove. How is he doing? I told her enough that the warmth disappeared and something sharper took its place. She had worked elder law cases for more than 30 years. She did not waste time pretending this sounded unusual. She laid it out cleanly. Because he had not signed the financial authority yet, there was still a chance to stop it before it became a legal fight. But the opening was narrow. We needed proof of his mental capacity from a credible doctor, in writing. We needed bank records showing what had already happened. We needed to report the situation to County Adult Services so there would be an official file and an investigation. Lauren, she said, and her voice became very still, if they intend to bring those papers back at his birthday, you are counting days, not months. Once his signature is on that page, the work becomes far harder. What matters most first? I asked. You're a nurse, she said. You know the value of a proper evaluation. Their plan depends on convincing everyone he lacks capacity. Take that lie away and they lose the foundation. When I hung up, I had tasks, deadlines, and a cold understanding that my mother still had a key to the front door. My job stopped feeling like a job then. It became a tool. Not a tool like my mother S. Diane used affection as a switch. Warmth when she wanted you close, guilt when she wanted you obedient, silence when she wanted you scared. Her method was a soft voice and a document pushed toward a man she described as too foggy to read it. My tools were different. Notes, records, evaluations, dates, signatures from people whose professional word mattered. She wanted my grandfather made incompetent in private. I would put his competence in writing. I called Dr. Evan Porter, a geriatrician I had worked with for 7 years. He was careful almost to the point of irritating, which was exactly why I wanted him. I told him what I had observed and what was being attempted. He did not offer a favor. He offered an appointment, a full cognitive and capacity assessment on Thursday morning, formal, scored, and documented. I called Grandpa that evening and explained. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Let them claim I'm missing. I'll sit for the exam and show them where I am." That was the first wall going up. My mother's entire story rested on the claim that Arthur could not understand what he was signing. A doctor's written finding would make that claim harder to sell. I was not going to scream. I was not going to plead. I was going to build something so factual that my mother's sweet voice could not walk around it. I slept a little that night, but not well. I kept thinking about her key. I kept thinking about the birthday gathering she had mentioned weeks earlier. I kept thinking about how quickly people move once they suspect the person they are using has allies. My mother called the next morning. Her tone was bright as warm syrup, which meant danger. "Sweetheart," she said, "I've been wanting to talk to you about your grandfather." She told me he was slipping. It broke her heart. She and Mark were only trying to keep him safe because older people could be exploited so easily. She said she would never forgive herself if he signed something unwise or got tricked by a stranger. I nearly laughed at the shape of it, but underneath the sweetness I heard the real purpose of the call. She was searching for what I knew. The old Lauren would have rushed to reassure her. I would have said, "Of course, Mom, I understand," and then she would have used those words later to prove I had agreed. I swallowed that impulse. "That sounds hard," I said, then I said nothing. Silence opened on her end of the line. I could almost hear her recalculating. After a moment, she brought up Grandpa's 82nd birthday party. "Everyone will be there," she said lightly. "Family, neighbors, the pastor, it should be beautiful." The words were casual. The structure beneath them was not. She was building an audience. Whatever she planned, she wanted witnesses, so the thing would look like family agreement instead of pressure. I said the party sounded nice and ended the call before my voice betrayed me. Then I sat at my table, very still. The signing was not going to happen quietly on the weekend. It was being moved into the party. She wanted people to see it and remember only the performance. That made her more dangerous than I had allowed myself to believe. She was thinking not only about what she would do, but how it would look afterward. On Wednesday, I took my grandfather to the bank. He wanted his statements mailed to his own address again, and he wanted a printout of every transaction for the previous 7 months. Plain, reasonable requests from a man asking questions about his own money. We sat across from a young banker named Jason Miller, whose expression grew more uncomfortable the longer he looked at the screen. Grandpa asked why his financial mail had been routed to his daughter's house. Jason said a request had been submitted on his behalf. Grandpa asked why Mark Collins had been added as an authorized signer on one account. Jason's ears turned red. There had been a limited authorization form, signed and notarized. It had apparently been presented in person by Carla Freeman, the woman with the heels, after my mother persuaded him weeks earlier that it was only for bill-paying help. The bank had processed it because, on paper, everything appeared proper. That was the lesson I wish more people understood. A thing can be processed correctly and still be wrong. The bank lobby was bright, polite, and useless in the way official places can be when the damage has already slipped through the proper boxes. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody accused anyone. Jason kept apologizing without actually being able to fix the whole thing in front of us. Every answer came wrapped in procedure. Forms, reviews, signatures, waiting periods. I remember Grandpa sitting very straight in the chair beside me, not angry, just deeply tired, as if he was watching his own careful life being translated into policy language by people who did not know him. My grandfather had noticed, questioned it, and appeared in person to fix it, and it still was not simple. Removing access took procedure. Disputing withdrawals took time. In some situations, the cooperation of the authorized person was needed, which was precisely how the door had been wedged open. Then Jason said something that froze me. Someone had called ahead to tell the branch that a financial authority naming Diane Harper would be presented soon, and they wanted the bank prepared to honor it immediately. The document was not signed yet, but the track had been laid. The only missing piece was Grandpa's name in ink. I asked Arthur quietly whether he had signed any such paper. No, he said. They were not waiting on the bank. They were waiting for the birthday party, for cake and neighbors and witnesses. We left with the printouts. We corrected the mailing address. But I walked out knowing the trap had already been half built. That evening, I looked into the woman with the heels. Her name was Carla Freeman. Online, she called herself a senior transition consultant, a title broad enough to mean whatever she needed it to mean. She was not an attorney. She was not a licensed social worker. She was a notary who ran a side business, helping families with difficult decisions. The reviews told a darker story. She specialized in quick signatures. Families who wanted an elderly parent moved or papers executed fast seemed to love her. Other relatives described finding out too late that she had arrived while a parent was medicated, tired, or isolated. Her fee structure appeared to reward completed transitions. To Carla, my grandfather was not Arthur Bennett. He was a closing. The more I read, the clearer the roles became. Diane brought the trust, the caring daughter saying everything was for Dad. Mark brought the need and the financial motive. Carla brought the mechanism that converted confusion, real or staged, into official ink. 3 people, 3 jobs, 1 target. Then I found the detail that made me close the laptop and stare at the wall. Carla's booking calendar showed a reserved block on the afternoon of Grandpa's birthday. No client name, just signing session. On a Saturday she had otherwise marked unavailable. That was it. They were not merely using the party as cover. They had scheduled the ambush down to the hour. Surround him with relatives, neighbors, frosting, and 82 balloons. Make him feel loved. Let Diane give a speech. Bring out the papers while everyone was softened. If he signed there, people would later swear they had watched him do it willingly. It was patient. It was clever. It was the coldest family plan I had ever seen. Thursday morning, I drove my grandfather to Dr. Porter's office. I sat in the waiting room for nearly 2 hours while a careful doctor asked careful questions. Dates, medications, memory tasks, reasoning, consequences, financial understanding. The kind of evaluation that does not care how convincing a daughter sounds in a living room. When they came out, Dr. Porter looked over his glasses and told me Arthur was one of the clearest men in his 80s he had assessed that year. Fully oriented, strong recall, able to explain his assets, his wishes, and the risks of delegation. Sound judgment. He would put it in writing, signed, and dated. My grandfather looked quietly satisfied, as if a stubborn column of numbers had finally balanced. In the car afterward, he reached into a canvas tote and placed an old blue cookie tin in my lap. The lid was dented at one corner and the paint had faded where fingers had opened it for decades. "It was Margaret's," he said. My grandmother, Margaret Bennett, had died while I was still in nursing school. "What is it?" I asked. "Read the letter first. At home. Alone." His hands rested steady on his knees. His voice did not shake. But his eyes were bright, and I understood that this tin had weight beyond paper. I held it against my coat the whole drive. The legal wall was rising. We had the doctor's assessment, the bank documents, the attorney's direction. But the reason for the fight was in that dented tin. Whatever my mother intended to do at the party, Grandpa had decided I needed to know what the house truly meant. That night, I opened the tin at my kitchen table. On top lay a letter in my grandmother's round handwriting, written a month or so before she died. It was not addressed only to me. It was addressed to the family, to be read when it mattered. She wrote about money and what it had done to families she had seen over the years. She wrote that inheritances could make people strangers. She worried ours would not be immune. Then she wrote about Diane, and that was the part that broke something open in me. Margaret knew my mother had carried a feeling of being second best. She wrote that Diane believed Arthur had loved his volunteer work, the church, the town, and the scholarship dream more than he loved his own daughter. Some of that hurt had been real, Grandma wrote. Some of it had been a story Diane fed until it grew teeth. Pain, she wrote, can rot a person whether it began as truth or invention. Please do not let money decide what we become to one another. Under the letter were the documents that explained everything. Grandpa's original will and a written statement of intent. The house was not meant to be sold for Diane, Mark, me, or anyone else in the family. Eventually, it was to fund a nursing scholarship in Margaret Bennett's name, for young women who needed help getting through school the way she once had needed help, and never received it. The house was not the prize my mother thought she was owed. It was the seed of something my grandmother had left behind. I sat there for a long time, hearing Diane's voice in my head. By New Year's, he won't even remember. He would remember. Dr. Porter had proved that. Margaret had left the purpose in a cookie tin. Now I had to make sure everyone else saw what my mother was trying to bury. On Friday, I filed a report with County Adult Services. I sat across from the intake worker and laid it out the way I would chart a patient's condition. Objective, ordered, supported. The redirected mail. The $21,700 in withdrawals. The bank printouts. Mark's added access. The pending authority paperwork. Carla Freeman's role, the booked signing on his birthday. Dr. Porter's capacity evaluation. I did not call my mother evil. I did not describe my own hurt. I gave facts with dates because institutions move on records, not outrage. I also called a senior financial abuse helpline. The person who answered was calm and patient. She walked me through possible steps, including the right to demand an accounting from anyone handling an older person's money and the importance of revoking unauthorized access quickly. No one handed me a victory. I made calls between shifts, scanned papers late at night, wrote timelines while my coffee went cold. I was building the case one document at a time. The intake worker took it seriously. She opened a file. Then she said what I had feared she would say. "These investigations take time, Ms. Mitchell. We need interviews and records. It can be weeks." I told her about the birthday party. I told her the signing was scheduled for that afternoon, in front of the people my mother had selected. Her expression tightened, but she was honest. She could not promise the county would conclude anything before then. I drove home knowing that official justice, even when real, would not arrive fast enough to save my grandfather in that living room. If he was going to be protected, it would happen in front of the birthday guests, and I would have to stand where my mother had planned to stand alone. My mother found out about the doctor. I still do not know how. Maybe someone confirmed an appointment. Maybe Mark had a banking contact who mentioned activity. Maybe Diane simply sensed that the ground had shifted. She called on Saturday, and this time there was no sweetness at all. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Taking him to some doctor without telling me, digging through his bank accounts. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "I know exactly what it looks like," I said. She talked over me. I was causing trouble. I was tearing the family apart. I had always believed I was smarter than everyone else. A good daughter would trust her mother. A loving family member would not go behind her back. There it was, the weapon that had worked on me for 37 years. Guilt. "You are hurting the family. You are selfish. You are making this ugly. Be quiet and we can all be fine." For most of my life, that was enough to bend me. I waited for the familiar collapse inside my chest. It did not come. "I'm not arguing with you," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I love Grandpa and I will not stay quiet while you do this." The silence on the line was different this time. She was not recalculating. She was stunned. I had said no before, but always softly enough that she could step over it. This was the first no with a wall behind it. "You will regret choosing this," she hissed. Then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen with the dead phone in my hand and my heart racing. Beneath the fear was something I had not felt around my mother since childhood: solid ground. She moved quickly after that. By the next day, she had changed the locks on Grandpa's house for his protection. She told relatives I had become manipulative, that I was after the property, that I had dragged an old man to a doctor and rummaged through his finances. She was excellent at making concerns sound like proof. 2 cousins stopped answering my messages. Calls to Grandpa went nowhere. My mother controlled who could see him and when. For 2 days, I could not reach him directly, and that silence was worse than any argument. I lay awake imagining him in the house with new locks, wondering whether I had vanished. Whether he thought I had folded after all. I want to be fair because my grandfather raised me to be fair. There was one moment that made my anger more complicated. After a long shift, I drove past my mother's house and saw her sitting alone in her car in the driveway. She had not gone inside. Her head was bowed, both hands covering her face, and she was crying hard. Not the pretty tears she could summon for an audience. Real ones. In that instant, I understood that fear was part of this. Mark's business had failed. Their savings were almost gone. They were closer to losing their own home than they had admitted. My mother was not a cartoon villain. She was a frightened woman who had convinced herself that taking her father's house early was only claiming what she deserved eventually. Pity pulled at me. Then I remembered Grandpa asking about his roses. I remembered her saying he would not remember by New Year's. The pity shrank to the size it belonged. Fear does not turn theft into love. I reached my grandfather through the one door Diane could not safely close: my profession. A friend from work, Kelly Ward, managed a licensed home health agency. Not gossip, not family interference. Proper wellness visits, paperwork, credentials, and legal reasons to assess an older client's condition. Grandpa requested a visit himself, which was entirely his right. My mother could hardly refuse without making herself look worse. Kelly went to the house. She called me afterward from her car. "He is fine," she said. "More than fine. Clear, steady eating, oriented. Honestly, sharper than some of my younger clients." Then she gave me his message. Before the locks were changed, he had met with Helen Brooks. He had signed a narrow legal authorization, witnessed independently, allowing Helen to act on specific money issues without handing control of his life to anyone. It was not the kind of sweeping power my mother wanted. It was the opposite, a limited protective tool chosen by a competent man to guard his accounts while he remained in charge. I had thought I was rescuing him. The truth was better. We were partners. He had chosen his ally, gathered proof, and set timing before I fully understood the game. Kelly passed along one more line from him. He said, "Tell Lauren not to worry about the party. Let them bring their papers." I sat in the hospital parking lot after we hung up and laughed for the first time in days. Grandpa was not hiding anymore. Neither was I over the next week. The pieces came together. I want to be clear. No miracle appeared. No secret rescuer arrived. Everyone who stood with my grandfather in the end was someone we deliberately contacted, asked, and prepared. Helen Brooks had the legal trail and the limited authorization. Dr. Porter had the capacity evaluation. The county caseworker had the open report, even if the investigation would take longer than we had. Kelly had seen him professionally and could speak to his condition. I met Helen in her office, and she gave me the most useful advice of the entire ordeal. "Do not make the first move an accusation," she said. "If you call your mother a thief in that room, half the guests will shut down. It becomes daughter against daughter, family drama, something people look away from. Let Diane present the papers. Let her make her speech. When she has committed to the story in front of everyone, then you answer with documents. Facts, not fury." My mother's weapon was performance, so we would let her perform. I asked Helen if she would come to the party. "I would be disappointed to miss it," she said. That night I spoke to Grandpa. For the first time since he pulled me into his house, I heard him laugh properly. "Let them cut the cake," he said. "Then we will see what is really being served." We had 6 days. I spent those days building a folder. It was nothing dramatic, plain manila, bent slightly at one corner. But I assembled it like a patient case for the most important family meeting of my life. First came Dr. Porter's written evaluation, dated, signed, direct. Behind it, the bank statements showing $21,700 in withdrawals, with each questionable line highlighted. Then the form showing Mark Collins added as an authorized person. Then the confirmation of the County Adult Services report. After that, information on Carla Freeman, her lack of legal or social work credentials, her notary work, her fee arrangement, and the appointment booked on Grandpa's birthday. At the back, I placed my grandmother's letter and the original will with the statement that the house was intended to fund the Margaret Bennett Nursing Scholarship. I considered recording the party. It would have been easy to hide my phone and catch something ugly. But that felt like my mother's world. Traps, appearances, little weapons. Grandpa had chosen evidence, not fabrication. He had pretended only to expose what was already true. I wanted every page in that folder to stand up in any room and, if needed, any court. They worked in what things could be made to look like. We would work in what things were. The night before the party, I spread the folder across my bed and checked every document twice, the way I check medication before giving it. Being right is not enough when someone is waiting for you to be careless. I practiced the sentences in the car, not because I wanted to sound dramatic, but because I knew my mother could make me stumble with one look. I practiced saying capacity evaluation. I practiced saying withdrawals he did not authorize. I practiced saying this is not a family misunderstanding. Each phrase felt awkward at first, then steadier. By the time I put the folder in my bag, the words belonged to me. 2 days before the birthday, one of my cousins finally answered a message. She had been included in the family group chat from which I had quietly been removed. Her voice was low and nervous. She told me what Diane had been saying. The plan was worse than I had imagined. After the cake, my mother would give a speech about hard choices and love. She would say Grandpa's memory had been failing, that the family needed to help him before he made a mistake. Then Carla Freeman would bring out the documents. Diane would ask him, gently and publicly, to sign the financial authority in front of everyone for transparency. The guests were not background. They were the point. If 40 or so people saw a devoted daughter help her father sign papers at his own birthday, then later those same people could testify it looked voluntary. The pastor had been invited specifically. So had 2 of Grandpa's oldest neighbors, both respected in Maple Grove. My mother had arranged the witnesses like furniture. When I hung up, fear gave way to a strange clarity. Diane thought she had filled the room with people who would bless her version, but witnesses cut in more than one direction. She had gathered exactly the people who needed to hear the truth. She thought she had chosen her audience. She had accidentally chosen her jury. The night before the party, Grandpa and I talked for a long time. We reviewed the order, who would be there, when Diane would speak, when I would step forward, when Helen would enter if needed. He was calm in a way that made me nervous. "Do you remember what I said when you came to the door?" he asked. "Come in now, get hidden," I said. "That was the last time you will ever hide from your mother," he told me. "Tomorrow you stand where she can see you." I pressed the phone hard against my ear so he would not hear me get emotional. Then he told me his part, and my stomach tightened. He intended to play the fog one last time. He would sit small and confused while Diane gave her speech. He would let Carla bring the papers close. He wanted my mother to show the room who she was before she realized who he still was. It was a risk. If someone rushed him, if he stumbled, if the moment went wrong, everything could tilt. But it was his decision, his house, his name, his life. "One last act," he said. "Then no more pretending for either of us." I did not sleep. I do not think he did either. The birthday party looked like love, and that was the terrible part. When I arrived at Grandpa's house that afternoon, my old key no longer worked. I had to wait for a relative to let me in, like a guest in the house where I had spent half my childhood. Inside, it was bright and warm. 82 silver balloons hung across the living room. A sheet cake sat on the dining table with Arthur written in green icing. Casseroles covered the counters. Neighbors laughed. The pastor shook hands near the hallway. The room smelled of coffee, frosting, and baked cheese. In the center of it all was my mother, glowing. She moved from person to person, touching elbows, accepting sympathy, lowering her eyes when she mentioned how hard it was to watch a parent decline. She was playing the role she had been rehearsing for weeks, the burdened daughter, brave and selfless. I saw what the party was, not a celebration. A set. Mark stood near the wall holding a glass he barely drank from. He kept watching the hallway. Near that hallway stood Carla Freeman in a navy blazer, slim leather folder tucked under her arm, waiting for her cue. Grandpa sat by the window in his favorite chair, looking small and misty-eyed, allowing a neighbor to pat his hand. He did not glance at me. He was already in character. I found a place near the fireplace, folder pressed against my side, and made myself breathe slowly. Then my mother tapped a fork against her glass. "Everyone," she said, "I'd like to say something about Dad." She was excellent, I have to admit that. Tears gathered at exactly the right time. She spoke of love and duty, of how difficult it was to see a brilliant man begin to lose his grip on everyday things. She said he misplaced bills, forgot conversations, got confused about money. She said it broke her heart, but someone had to protect him from scams, bad decisions, and people who might take advantage. Several neighbors nodded with sympathy. Diane said she had found a wonderful consultant who helped families through these transitions. Carla stepped forward with the professional smile of someone pretending not to know she was being introduced as a solution. "So today," my mother said, voice trembling just enough, "with family and friends present, with nothing hidden, Dad is going to give me financial authority to help manage things. I want all of you to see that this is his choice." It was beautifully wrapped. She addressed a theft in the language of openness. Carla opened the leather folder on the coffee table. She smoothed the pages and uncapped a pen. Grandpa lifted his face with damp, uncertain eyes. "Is it time for the candles?" he asked. Soft laughter moved through the room. Tender laughter. People fell further into the story, the dear confused old man, the devoted daughter. Carla brought the pen toward his hand. "Right here, Arthur," she said gently. "Just on this line." My mother smiled. Mark leaned away from the wall. This was the moment they had constructed. The signature, the witnesses, the crime made to look like care. I placed my cup on a side table and stepped into the middle of the room. "Before my grandfather signs anything," I said, "everyone here needs to hear the rest." My voice was level, not loud. Years of speaking calmly during hospital crises held me upright. Every face turned. My mother's smile remained, but her eyes hardened. "Lauren," she said, sweet for the guests and sharp underneath, "this is not the time." It is exactly the time, I said. You said you wanted everything done in front of everyone, so let's do that. The air changed. People can feel when a polite gathering has stepped onto dangerous ground. For a second after I spoke, nobody moved. I heard the refrigerator hum in the kitchen and the tiny squeak of a balloon rubbing against the ceiling. That tiny, ridiculous sound made the whole room feel unreal. My mother had staged the afternoon so carefully that even the decorations seemed to be holding their breath. Carla held the pen still above the paper. Mark's jaw locked. Diane moved closer and lowered her voice. You are embarrassing yourself. Sit down. For one last second, the old reflex flickered. Apologize, retreat, make the discomfort end. I looked over her shoulder at Grandpa. His eyes were on me now, the fog thinning at the edges. I turned back to my mother. I am a geriatric nurse, I said. I care for people Grandpa's age every day. I know the difference between someone who is declining and someone being treated like he has already disappeared. Then I addressed the room. You came to celebrate his 82nd birthday. Before anyone watches him sign away control over his money, you should know what has been happening. The quieter I spoke, the more the room listened. My mother had built the afternoon on being the only narrator. I had taken the story away from her. I opened the folder. This is a capacity evaluation, I said, placing the first document on the coffee table beside Carla's papers. It was completed 3 days ago by Dr. Evan Porter, a geriatric specialist. It states that Arthur Bennett is fully oriented, has strong recall, understands his finances, and is competent to manage his own affairs. A murmur passed through the guests. My mother's entire speech had depended on the claim that he could not understand. A doctor's signature had just cut through it. I placed the next pages down. These are bank records from the last 4 months. $21,700 in withdrawals Grandpa says he did not authorize. This page shows Mark Collins added to one account through a notarized form. Carla's face went still. And this, I continued, is confirmation that County Adult Services has opened an investigation into financial exploitation involving Arthur Bennett. The word exploitation landed heavily. The pastor straightened. One of the neighbors put a hand to her mouth. I looked at Carla. The woman holding that pen is Carla Freeman. She is not a lawyer. She is not a licensed social worker. She works as a notary and transition consultant, and she had a signing appointment reserved for this exact afternoon on his birthday. I let the room sit with that. I did not shout. I did not call my mother names. I simply put true things in the open, one after another, until the beautiful story Diane had made began to collapse in front of the people she had invited to admire it. Carla capped the pen slowly. Her professional smile had vanished. She tried to rescue herself first. My services are entirely lawful, she said, smoothing her blazer. The family contacted me. I have done nothing improper. A voice from the doorway answered before I could. Then you should have no problem explaining it to your own counsel. Helen Brooks stepped into the living room, gray-haired, composed, and carrying herself like a person who had seen every version of this trick before. I represent Mr. Bennett, she said. 2 weeks ago, while competent and with an independent witness, he granted me limited authority to address specific financial irregularities. He did that because he anticipated this attempt. Ms. Freeman, I would stop talking unless your attorney is present. Carla's mouth closed. She gathered her folder, avoided everyone's eyes, and left without another word. That is how people behave when they treat lives like transactions. The moment the transaction becomes dangerous, they are gone. Then the room looked at Mark. He was still by the wall, but whatever confidence he had brought in was gone. He looked cornered and smaller than I had ever seen him. The missing money moved through an account you could access, I said. Your business shut down in April. Your own mortgage is behind. I was not guessing. It was all documented. Mark opened his mouth, found nothing useful, and closed it again. In less than 10 minutes, the structure my mother had built began falling apart. The consultant gone, the husband silent, the paperwork exposed. Their plan needed darkness, confusion, and the assumption that no one would look closely. In front of witnesses and documents, it could not hold its shape. Only my mother remained in the center of the room. Everyone was watching her. Then Grandpa stood. He rose slowly, but not weakly. He stood the way he had stood behind church finance tables and town meetings for decades, steady and certain. The confusion left his face so completely that people gasped. The vague old man they had pitied all afternoon vanished. In his place stood Arthur Bennett, retired bookkeeper, clear-eyed and fully present. "I would like to speak at my own birthday," he said. The room went silent. "I am not confused. I have not been confused. For months, I have known my daughter and her husband were circling this house and my accounts. I let them believe I was slipping so they would show the whole plan instead of taking it in pieces." He looked around at the neighbors, the cousins, the pastor. "The day they first brought papers, I had Lauren hide in the kitchen so she could hear them herself. Everything she placed on that table is true. I understand my property. I understand my money. I understand exactly what those papers would have done. And nothing will be signed in this house today." Someone let out a breath that sounded almost like laughter, half relief and half shock. Grandpa looked at me, and for a second I saw the man who used to save me the corner piece of every birthday cake. Then he turned to Diane. I stepped beside him. "No one signs anything today," I said. "Mom, this is over." That was when my mother cracked. The public sweetness dropped from her face. The trembling, loving daughter disappeared, and what came out was loud, raw, and furious. "You people have no idea what I gave up," she shouted. "For 40 years, I watched him pour his money, his time, his attention into that house, that town, that scholarship nonsense, into her memory, into everyone but me." She pointed at Grandpa, then at me. "And now you all stand here acting righteous. You think I'm the selfish one. I am the one who stayed. I am the one who dealt with him. I am the one who deserved something." Heads drew back around the room. The reversal was complete. The helpless elder was not the danger. The shouting daughter, red-faced and blaming her father at his own birthday party, had become visible to everyone. The louder she became, the smaller she looked. I did not answer. I did not need to. Every word she threw at us proved the documents on the table. When she finally ran out of breath, the silence that followed felt enormous. "Come in now, get hidden," I said softly. She stared at me, confused. "That is what Grandpa told me the day you came with those papers. I hid, I listened, I heard you." I let that settle. "I am not hiding from you anymore, neither is he." For the first time in my life, my mother had no ready reply. I took Dr. Porter's evaluation from the table and held it up, not as a threat, but as the answer to the sentence that had haunted me since that first afternoon. "You said he would not remember by New Year's," I said. "You said it as if that made him less human." I laid the page in front of her. "He will remember this New Year's, and the next one, and everyone here will remember what happened today." Diane looked at the doctor's signature, then at her father standing beside me, tall and clear. Something in her face changed when she understood there was no path back to the story she had built. The pastor stepped forward and gently touched her arm. "Diane," he said, "let's step outside." She allowed him to guide her toward the door. She passed the balloons, the untouched cake with Arthur's name, the neighbors who no longer knew where to look. Mark had already slipped out. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back at my grandfather. I do not know what she wanted from him: forgiveness, weakness, an opening. Whatever she wanted, he did not give it. The door closed behind her. For a moment, the house was completely quiet. Then Grandpa exhaled and his shoulders lowered as if he had been carrying a weight for months and had finally set it down. "Well," he said with the driest little smile, "we still have cake." Somehow, people laughed. Not because it was funny, exactly, but because the room needed permission to breathe. The weeks afterward were quieter than the party, because once the truth was public, it did not need to shout. County Adult Services continued its investigation and confirmed much of what the folder had already shown. The financial authority my mother wanted never took effect. With Helen's help and the bank's cooperation, most of the $21,700 was traced and recovered from the account Mark had used. Carla Freeman was reported to the proper notary oversight office and to the senior fraud help line. Later, I heard she stopped taking clients in Maple Grove. Mark did not stay long after the money disappeared and the story turned public. My mother was not arrested. Grandpa could have pushed harder, and Helen said there was enough to try. He chose not to. She is still my daughter, he told me. I do not want her in jail, I want her out of my accounts. That is what happened. Diane lost every bit of access to his money, his mail, his house, and his decisions. She also lost the image she had spent a lifetime polishing because small towns remember what happens in crowded living rooms. Grandpa stayed in the house he built with his own key back in his own pocket. The roses stayed. The cookie tin went into Helen's file. And the Margaret Bennett Nursing Scholarship was set up the way my grandmother had wanted, funded by the house when the time came, protected in writing, and no longer dependent on anyone's good behavior. Grandpa asked me to help oversee it. I said yes before he finished asking. The last time I stood in that living room after everyone had gone, he handed me a slice of cake from the corner, the way he had when I was little. "No more hiding," he said. I took the plate, looked at the doorway where my mother had left, and nodded. "No more," I said.